Hello, family. Before we dive into this emotional and unforgettable love story, let us ask you a few questions. Have you ever sacrificed something big for someone you love? Have you ever been forgotten by the very person you helped rise? Do you believe people can truly change, even after betrayal? If your answer is yes, or even maybe, then this story is definitely for you. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss stories that inspire, challenge, and stay with you long after the last word. Comment below what time you're watching and which country you're tuning in from. We love hearing from you. This is the heartbreaking yet powerful story of Naomi, a brilliant young woman in Lagos who gave up her dream of becoming a doctor to fund the university education of the boy she loved. Daniel, once poor and hopeless, rose to wealth and success as a top engineer. But success changed him. Years later, when Naomi desperately needed his help as her mother was dying, Daniel sent her pocket change and proposed to another woman instead. But what he didn't know was that Naomi had been keeping a secret, a devastating truth that would shatter his perfect world and force him to confront everything he had become. This African love story will break your heart, restore your faith in justice, and leave you speechless. Stay with us to the end, because when Daniel's two worlds collide, everything changes. Ready? Let's begin. Roots of Promise, a story of love, loss, redemption. The dusty classrooms of Makoko High School groaned under the heat of a typical Lagos afternoon. 17-year-old Daniel Omatayo hunched over his exam paper, sweat trickling down his brow as he scribbled calculations furiously. The room buzzed faintly with murmured prayers, scratchy pens, and the occasional impatient sigh. Daniel's calculator was secondhand, the buttons faded from overuse. Around him, classmates submitted their answers confidently, their polished school shoes and fresh textbooks betraying more privileged backgrounds. Daniel's heart pounded with desperation. This exam was his ticket out of Makoko's chaos, his one shot at a university education, and an escape from the poverty that had gripped his family for generations. Outside the school gates, the sun bathed Lagos in an orange haze. Naomi Adebayo, 18, waited beneath the old mango tree, her arms filled with fabric from her mother's tailoring shop. She saw Daniel approaching, head bowed. "What happened?" she asked, sensing his turmoil. Daniel sighed, slumping beside her on the wooden bench. "I don't think I made it. And even if I did, we can't afford the fees. My dreams are as good as dead." Naomi's chest tightened. Daniel had been her friend since they were kids. Brilliant, kind, determined. She had always believed he'd make it. Without hesitation, Naomi reached into her tote bag and pulled out a battered biscuit tin. Inside was the money she'd been saving for medical school. She had been offered admission into the University of Ibadan to study pediatrics. "Take it," she said, pressing the tin into his hands. Daniel froze. "Naomi, no. That's your future." "It's ours," she cut in. "I believe in you, and I won't watch you throw your dreams away." Under the mango tree that had seen their childhood unfold, a sacred promise was made. He vowed to pay her back, to never forget, and to build the future they dreamed of together. 2 months later, Daniel was standing on the campus of the University of Lagos, barely believing he was there. He had been awarded a partial scholarship, and Naomi's money had covered the rest. He threw himself into his studies, driven by gratitude and purpose. During late-night study sessions in his cramped hostel room, he'd reread the letter Naomi wrote him when he left. "Don't forget the mango tree or the girl who sat with you under it." Her words were both comfort and reminder. Naomi stayed behind, juggling tailoring jobs, tutoring children, and caring for her ailing mother. She deferred her admission, telling herself it was only temporary. "Next year," she promised herself, "when Daniel starts working, he'll help. Then I'll go back." She kept believing in their shared dream, but as time passed, his calls became less frequent, his texts shorter. He always sounded tired, busy. Naomi reminded herself that he was building a better life for both of them. Her faith never wavered. By the time Daniel graduated with top honors in engineering, he was no longer the skinny boy from Makoko. He had completed internships with major firms, worn his first suit, and even rented a furnished studio in Ikoyi. One night, he called Naomi. "I got the job," he said breathlessly. "They're offering a flat, a car, even a travel allowance. Naomi, we made it." Her voice cracked with joy. "I'm so proud of you, Daniel." He promised to send money for her school fees soon. "We'll catch up now. You'll finally go to med school." But Naomi heard something new in his voice, distance like a door quietly closing. 6 months later, Daniel adjusted his Rolex and glanced at the skyline from the 14th floor of his Lekki office. The city glittered beneath him, Echo Atlantic rising in steel and glass. His new life was fast, clean, and ambitious. His name now appeared on engineering journals, tagged in Instagram stories with politicians and CEOs. One evening at a networking gala, his boss introduced him to Amara Okoye, a poised and articulate woman with an Oxford degree in international law and the poise of Lagos royalty. Amara represented everything Daniel aspired to. Her father's construction empire had built bridges across Africa, and she spoke passionately about public-private partnerships and infrastructure that could empower underserved communities. Daniel was captivated not just by her elegance, but by the fact that she understood the rooms he now moved in. Their chemistry was instant, their goals aligned. Over champagne and jazz, Daniel started to imagine a future with Amara, one where Naomi and the mango tree were part of a chapter he had outgrown. Naomi, meanwhile, battled silently in Machine. Her mother's health had declined, hospital bills mounted. She sent Daniel a message. "Mama's sick, we need help. Even 100,000 naira could make a difference." His reply came the next day, sending 15,000 naira, tied up in meetings. "Hope she recovers soon." Naomi stared at the screen, disbelief choking her. This was the same Daniel who once promised her the world? She bit back tears, refusing to reply. That same night, photos of Daniel proposing to Amara on a private beach in Lekki hit social media. Naomi sat in the dark, watching a man she no longer recognized begin a new life built on her sacrifice. The private beach in Lekki glowed with soft candlelight. Rose petals led to a table set for two, waves crashing gently in the background. Daniel knelt, holding out a diamond ring. "Amara, you're my future. Will you marry me?" She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, then nodded with tears in her eyes. The proposal was posted within hours. "From Makoko to millionaire," one headline read. To outsiders, it looked like a fairy tale. Only Daniel felt the tremor inside him, a shadow clinging to every joy. Back in Mushin, Naomi sat on a bench outside the hospital, the stale smell of disinfectant heavy in the air. Her mother lay unconscious in the ward, her breath shallow and uneven. Naomi had sold her laptop, her jewelry, even the sewing machine that once kept them afloat. But it wasn't enough. The surgery would cost 250,000 naira, money she no longer dared ask Daniel for. Mercy, her best friend, brought her a bottle of malt and sat beside her in silence. "You've always believed in him," Mercy said quietly. Naomi nodded. "Maybe too much." Mercy hesitated. "There's something you should know. I saw Daniel on Instagram. He proposed to that lawyer girl. On the same weekend, you texted him for help." Naomi said nothing. Her heart was already too broken for words. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out the crumpled letter of her deferred admission, now 6 years old. "I gave him everything, even my dream of becoming a doctor. And when I needed him, he gave me pocket change." She whispered, "Tell me, Mercy, how does someone forget who they are?" 2 days later, Daniel's phone buzzed during a meeting with a Japanese investor. The screen flashed with an unfamiliar number. He ignored it, then again when it rang the second time. On the third ring, he picked up. "Hello?" Mercy's voice trembled. "Daniel, it's Naomi's friend. Her mother passed away last night." Silence. "She'd been trying to reach you. She needed help, Daniel. She's devastated." Daniel's world tilted. He gripped the table to steady himself. The room grew silent as Mercy continued. "The funeral is tomorrow. She asked for you. Please, don't let her go through this alone." The call ended. Daniel stared at the phone, the guilt rising like bile. He turned to the window. The skyline that once symbolized achievement now felt cold and meaningless. By dawn the next day, Daniel was on the road to Mushin. The closer he got, the more his polished facade peeled away. As he stepped into Naomi's family compound, the grief hit him like a slap. Women wailed in the background. Naomi sat alone under the same mango tree, dressed in mourning black. Her face was hollow, her posture stiff. When she saw Daniel, she didn't move. Her eyes didn't soften. She didn't smile. He walked toward her, but she stood and turned away. Mercy blocked his path gently. "She doesn't want to see you, Daniel," she said. She said the man she once loved died the day he chose luxury over loyalty. Daniel sat on the dusty steps of the funeral home long after the mourners left. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't cried. Only stared. Naomi eventually returned, a worn leather journal in her hands. She sat beside him, silent for a while. Then she opened the journal. Inside were photographs, letters, and pages filled with handwriting, her dreams, her plans, her pain. She handed him a faded university admission letter. University of Ibadan, full scholarship for pediatrics. I was going to become a doctor. Daniel stared, stunned. "Naomi, you never told me." "I didn't need to. I believed in you so much, I gave it all up without asking for anything in return. I used the scholarship stipend to pay your deposit, registration fees, accommodation. I thought you'd remember that." Her voice was calm, but every word was a blade. She handed him another paper. "This letter came 2 weeks later. I lost my spot, couldn't pay in time. The scholarship was reassigned." Daniel's chest tightened until he couldn't breathe. The money she'd given him wasn't just her savings, it was her entire future. "Why didn't you tell me?" he choked out. Naomi turned to him, eyes weary. "Because by the time I realized what I'd done, you were already flying, and I didn't want to be the weight that pulled you back." At that very moment, in a bridal shop in Victoria Island, Amara examined her wedding dress. Seamstresses fussed over the hem as her mother flipped through invitation proofs. "The Minister of Works RSVP'd. This wedding will make headlines," her mother beamed. But Amara's mind was elsewhere. Daniel had been distant, cold. Something was wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone he hadn't told her about. "I'm going to surprise him," she said. "He's been under pressure. Maybe I can help." An hour later, her chauffeur pulled up outside the funeral home in Mushin. As she stepped out in a white linen jumpsuit and heels, the sight before her froze her in place. Daniel, kneeling on the ground, was weeping. Beside him stood a woman in black, holding a journal. Amara's stomach dropped. "Daniel," she called. Both turned. Naomi's eyes narrowed as realization dawned. Daniel stood, trembling. "Amara, I can explain." Naomi didn't move. She held her ground. "This is the woman you were going to marry?" she asked, voice laced with calm fury. Amara looked between them, confusion melting into shock. "Who is she?" she asked. "And why are you here?" Naomi stepped forward, her voice clear. "I'm the reason your fiancé ever made it out of Makoko. I gave up my future so he could build his. I paid for his university with the money meant for my medical school. When I needed him, he proposed to someone else." She handed Amara the journal. Amara opened it, her eyes scanning the pages slowly. The reality of what had been hidden from her crashed like a wave. "You lied to me," she said to Daniel, her voice breaking. "Everything we built on her sacrifice. You didn't just hide her, you erased her." Daniel tried to speak. "Amara, please." "No," she interrupted. "Don't plead. Don't explain. I see it now. You loved what I represented, not who I am. Connections, class, status." Turning to Naomi, she whispered, "Thank you. You're stronger than both of us combined." Then she removed the engagement ring from her finger and placed it in Daniel's hand. "I can't marry a man who forgets the hands that lifted him. If you could abandon her, you'll do the same to me." Amara walked away, her figure tall and proud. Naomi stood in silence as Daniel sank to the ground, the ring clutched in his palm, his world in pieces. "What do I do now?" he asked Naomi, tears streaming down. She looked at him, not with anger, but with the mournful wisdom of someone who had finally stopped hoping. You can't fix this, but maybe, just maybe, you can learn from it. Days passed. Daniel didn't return to his Lecky apartment. He stayed in Machin, wandering the neighborhood he once called home. The streets hadn't changed much. The same barefoot boys played football in the dust. The same aroma of suya and exhaust clung to the air. But Daniel had changed. Every corner whispered memories of who he used to be. He stopped by his old school, stood beneath the rusted goalpost, and cried for the boy who once dreamed of lifting his family out of poverty not by stepping over people, but by rising with them. When Naomi returned to the family compound after enrolling in a nursing program at Lasouth, she was surprised to see Daniel repairing the community borehole with local artisans. "I don't want your forgiveness," he said when she approached, "but I want to be the man I promised I'd be under that mango tree. I've started a scholarship for kids like me. I named it after you." Naomi stared at him, stunned. "I'm not dead, Daniel," he smiled faintly. "No, but your dream died for mine. It deserves to be reborn." Weeks turned into months. Daniel resigned from the luxury firm and opened a modest engineering startup focused on community development. His clients weren't oil barons, but local governments and NGOs. His office was small, but it was honest. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt peace. The ring Amara returned to him sat in his drawer not as a reminder of loss, but as a symbol of what happens when ambition outruns integrity. He wore no watch, no designer labels, but he now wore something far more valuable: accountability. 6 months later, under a newly painted school hall in Makoko, Daniel stood before 50 students. The first cohort of the Naomi Adebayo Scholarship Fund was seated before him, their eyes bright with dreams. "When I was your age," he began, voice steady, "I was brilliant but broke. Someone believed in me so much, she gave up her future so I could have mine. I forgot that once. But I won't ever again." Applause filled the air, not for Daniel's wealth, but for his awakening. In the audience, Naomi sat with her nursing school classmates, dressed in scrubs fresh from a night shift. She would graduate in 6 months. She didn't speak much to Daniel these days, but she came to every event quietly from the back. When their eyes met, it was not the look of lovers, but something deeper: mutual respect. She smiled. He smiled back. It was enough. Later that evening, Naomi returned to her small apartment, surrounded by anatomy books and lesson plans. Her phone pinged with a message. "Today the tree got new roots. Thank you for planting the first one, D." She stared at the message for a while, then replied, "Keep watering it. That's your real legacy." Back in Makoko, the mango tree still stood tall. Children played beneath it. Young lovers whispered dreams under its shade, and occasionally it listened to promises. Some would be broken, others kept. But the tree-like time always waited to see which ones would bloom. Moral lesson: true success is not measured by titles, wealth, or prestige, but by how you honor the sacrifices others made for your rise, and how you lift others as you climb. The story of Daniel and Naomi reminds us that dreams deferred can still take root in new soil, and that redemption is always possible for those willing to return, remember, and rebuild. The end. If you love powerful African stories that move your heart and make you think, subscribe now, like this video, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this again.